everyone. Welcome to the Career Boost podcast of the Medical Portfolio Hub. I'm your host, Ricardo Ladeiras Lopes. Joining us today is Professor Filippo Crea, Professor of Cardiology and Director of the Center of Excellence in Cardiovascular Sciences, Gemelli Isola Catholic University in Rome. A world-renowned expert in myocardial ischemia, his research has deeply advanced our understanding of both chronic and acute coronary syndromes, particularly the role of microcirculation. Professor Crea has held several high-profile roles within the European Society of Cardiology, and since 2020 serves as the editor-in-chief of the European Heart Journal, the ESC's flagship journal. Professor Crea, thank you so much for joining us on the Career Boost podcast.
Thank you for your kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, and it means a lot. Let's start. Please provide a brief overview of your career journey, highlighting the key milestones and decisions that shaped your path in medicine.
Well, I graduated in Pisa. Then 1 year after graduation, I went to London, Hammersmith Hospital, and I spent in London about 15 years, very interesting, exciting years. Then I had the opportunity to go back to Italy. And then in Italy, I became, after some years, full professor of cardiology at the Catholic University in Rome. At the same time, director of the postgraduate school in cardiology and director of a PhD course in cellular and molecular cardiology. After a few years, I also became director of the Department of Cardiovascular Science. This regarding the academic positions. Regarding the European Society of Cardiology, I created the working group in coronary pathophysiology and microcirculation, alas, many years ago. And 4 years ago, as you said, I became editor-in-chief of the European Heart Journal.
Can you describe a mentor who had a significant impact on your professional development?
Well, my mentor has been one of the greatest cardiologists of his time, and is Attilio Maseri. I started with him in Pisa immediately after my graduation. I got my specialty in cardiology with him. He was director of the school in Pisa. And then I followed him to UK. So it's been, I spent with him a long time. He's been a wonderful mentor. He was the first to propose that there's life beyond coronary stenosis. He was the first to propose that coronary stenosis explained part of ischemic heart disease, but to a large extent, ischemic heart disease is explained by functional alterations of epicardial arteries and of microcirculation. So it was really the first in the world to have the intuition that ischemic heart disease is more than stenosis. And what we've been done in the last 20, 25 years proves that this working hypothesis was indeed correct. So definitely, Attilio Maseri has been my mentor and like a second father for me. And you know, this is the beauty of the academic life, to start with a mentor who really teaches you a lot, and then if you're good enough, you become the mentor of your students. And this is the beauty of academic life, this continuous transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next generation.
What were some of the major challenges you encountered in your career, and how did you overcome these obstacles?
Well, the hurdles are mainly related to the progress of our knowledge. Again, in the academic career, you have three activities. One activity is patient care. Of course, in our career as doctors, as clinicians, we deal with patients. So the first challenge is to really provide patients the best possible treatment. If you have, if you love medicine, this comes as a consequence. because if you love medicine, you love your patients. And of course, this is a good starting point to treat them in the best possible way. Then a second challenge is teaching. And initially, at least in my experience, you tend to give less relevance to the teaching activity. But with the passage of time, you realize that teaching and mentorship are really a source of enormous satisfaction. But the most challenging aspect of an academic career is research, because research means continuously to go for new things, to formulate new hypotheses and test these new hypotheses. And sometimes your hypotheses are wrong, and when you don't prove that they are right, this is a bit frustrating. The element which is important to overcome the difficult moments in your research activity is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm in life is important, in research work is even more important.
How do you manage work-life balance in a demanding field like medicine? Are there specific strategies or practice you've found effective?
Yeah, very simply, I asked my wife. I am lucky because for many reasons, but in particular because I have a wonderful wife. And when I know that she's unhappy with what I do, this means that I have to recalibrate between work and life. So I just follow her suggestions, and has been very successful so far.
Let's change topic now. What are your thoughts on gender disparities in the medical field and considering healthcare professionals? Can you discuss some potential ways to address these issues and promote equality in profession?
Well, the issue is there because we know that the prevalence of women in top positions is less than men. This is in Europe, is in US, in Australia. So this gap is still there. Things go better and better, but the gap is still there. And we are on the right track, but a lot of work remains to be done to be sure that this gender difference is really resolved. Also, if I think of the European of the ESC journal family, this is a journal family of 18 journals, and only one editor-in-chief is a woman. So definitely we have room for improvement.
Shifting gears now to critical thinking, which plays a crucial role in medicine. How do you apply and cultivate this skill in your daily work? And can you provide an example of how it has helped in your practice?
Well, this is a very important question because I strongly believe that the really important challenge is to identify what are the important questions. Uh, in a brilliant mind, not necessarily mind, I mean, just I don't pretend to have a brilliant mind. I'm very systematic in what I do. But when we come to a brilliant mind is flooded by questions, several questions. The real challenge is to identify among these several questions what is important in our field of interest, clinical research. The problem is which question is clinically relevant. So have we develop in our mind several interesting questions, but not all of them have the same relevance, the same priority. So the real challenge is to identify what are the important questions. And then, of course, you must develop a methodology which allows you to test these questions properly. But the methodology, in a sense, is easier to learn. It's a technique like surgery, like PCI. to identify the right methodology to test your working hypothesis, your question, is something you can learn relatively easily. What is more difficult is to identify what is the important questions among the many which come to your mind. Well, in my life, I was lucky in identifying at least one important question, and the important question was uh, why patients with typical angina do not have stenosis. We come back uh, to the initial issue. When I started my work as a cardiologist, in textbooks, I read that the angina can only be present if there is a stenosis. And my mentor started challenging this dogma. But then in my clinical practice, it became obvious to find patients every day, frequently, patients who reported what I read on in textbooks, the typical angina, no, standard chest pain, which comes when you make an exercise and goes away with rest. Typical angina, what I was used to find, what I was used to read in textbooks. But these patients didn't have stenosis. And so this was an example of a question which was clinically relevant. And the question was, okay, if the stenosis is not there, what is the cause of angina in this patient? So this was the question. And time proved that this question was indeed clinically relevant. Now we know that 50%, 55% of patients with angina and the positive stress test do not have stenosis. So the prevalence is massive. And we missed these patients for many years. And we know that 10% of patients with myocardial infarction do not have stenosis. So this is a case where I've been lucky because I asked myself an important question and I thought, well, it is worth investigating this important question in order to find answers. And then the answers came, but after 20 years.
In your opinion, what is an important quality for effective leadership in medicine?
Uh, well, I think that for a leader, the most important quality is to give a good example. As simple as that. If you are in charge and you give a good example, if your behavior is impeccable, then this is extremely helpful for people working with you. Uh, it's like with sons and daughters. I mean, the only thing we can do with our children is to give a good example. I strongly believe that we shouldn't force them in one direction or another. For instance, I never forced my son to become a doctor. I just gave my good example. I tried to give my good example in my daily life in the family, but it's the same in your working place. Then he became, he's a professional violin player at the Opera House in Rome, but also if went for a different trajectory. But I hope that the good example I tried to give uh, has worked well in developing his character and his life. This is at home, but in the working place, in the working space, is the same thing. If we manage to give a good example, it's more likely that the system we we uh, we we organize, which works around us, produces positive results.
What practical advice would you offer our young listeners looking to advance their careers in cardiology? Are there any common pitfalls to avoid or opportunities to seek out?
Here again, very simple rules, very simple suggestions. One is enthusiasm. Again, enthusiasm is important in life, and the second attitude, which pays off very well, is perseverance. Uh, I uh, I used to tell my young colleagues when they have a paper rejected uh, from an important journal, and I tell them, listen, this is a very positive experience. You have to learn from this experience, although the paper has been rejected. And in order to learn and in order to improve, please learn what was wrong with your manuscript. So next time you will not make the same mistake. But don't be discouraged by the rejection. But please, you have a lot of enthusiasm. Preserve your enthusiasm. Be resilient. Be perseverant. And eventually you will prove that your point is right.
Looking ahead now, what developments or changes do you anticipate in the field of cardiology over the next 10 years? And how might these impact patient care or medical practice?
Well, three main topics. One is improvement in our ability to predict cardiovascular diseases. Uh, because I'm not happy at all with score two or other scores for prediction of cardiovascular disease. This is the best that we can offer at the present time. But I think that the combination of scores as we have, in addition to polygenic risk scores, which give you the predisposition to the susceptibility to environmental risk factors. So on the one hand, you have environmental risk factors, but the other thing in the equation, which is important, is the susceptibility to these risk factors, and polygenic risk score can work very well in this direction. And then also in improving our ability to predict, imaging will be important. For instance, there's some very interesting study from Oxford, Carolano Santoniades, on the predictive role of perivascular fat inflammation, so putting together risk factors, polygenic risk score, imaging, and also including what we tend to call now residual risk related to inflammation. Putting all this together, our ability to predict can be really much more personalized. The second line of development, which would change the way we practice medicine, is artificial intelligence, because the integration of artificial intelligence can open windows which are incredibly important. And the third line of development are nucleic acid-based treatments. Now, really, this new technology is producing some fantastic results. A few months ago, a paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine about gene editing in patients with amyloidosis. One shot is enough to reduce the level of transthyretin close to zero forever. So this technology is really opening a new perspective.
Last question. Is there a particular book you would recommend that has been influential in your life or career?
Well, uh, can I suggest two books instead of one?
Of course.
Well, one definitely is Karl Popper, the on the progress of scientific knowledge. And the theory is that in order to be innovative, the attitude must be to falsify current knowledge. You must continuously falsify current knowledge. And if the falsification works, then you will open a new chapter. This is what happened to me, what I told you before. Falsification of the theory that stenosis can only because ischemia can only be caused by stenosis. basically, I tried to falsify this theory, proving that this theory doesn't explain all patients we visit, symptoms in all patients we visit. So the falsification theory of Karl Popper is something everybody should learn because every colleague interested in research should read because shows really the way to follow in order to be innovative. So this is regarding science. Regarding patients, regarding clinical care, I suggest to read Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes. When I studied medicine, I learned medicine in textbooks and in books of Sherlock Holmes because Sherlock Holmes really made a science of deductive reasoning and medicine to treat the patient appropriately, to identify the right diagnosis, the path to follow to reach the right diagnosis is very much what Conan Doyle, what Sherlock Holmes does in these books. There is a culprit, and scientific deduction leads to the identification of the culprit of the person who committed the crime. And in medicine, it's the same thing. You have a patient, you have symptoms, and there is a killer, which is the deceased. And starting from symptoms, you must identify the killer. It's precisely what Sherlock Holmes does in his book. Karl Popper and Conan Doyle. Please read them, and you will find that will be extremely interesting.
As we wrap up today's episode, I would like to thank you, Professor Filippo Crea, for sharing your insights and experiences with us. Our discussion has touched on various aspects of a medical career, from personal growth and challenges to the future of cardiology and also the importance of leadership in healthcare. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to bringing you more enlightening discussions in our future episodes. Thank you.
Thank you again for the invitation.